Everyone for joining. This is the City of Alameda Democratic Club U.S. Congress District 12 endorsement meeting per our bylaws. We hold these to do club votes to figure out who we might endorse per our charter rules. So anyone that has paid their membership dues before this meeting has started and attended a meeting is eligible to vote in this. And if you haven't done that, but you're still here, it's still important to join so that you can be a part of the upcoming endorsement processes for our future endorsement meetings that we'll be doing this year, but also continuing forward into next year when we do things like local elections and ballot measures. So starting off, thank you everyone for being here. It's great to see everybody. Lots of people already, old members, new members, everyone's here. It's great to have so many people that are actually interested in the democratic process and the endorsement process. We're excited to have some of the candidates tonight for the Democratic primary for U.S. Congress in District 12. We have Tony Desog, Denard Ingram, Tim Sanchez, Latifah Simon, and Dr. Jennifer Tran here with us. And we are very happy and humbled to have them willing to come to our club and speak on these issues so that we can understand them as candidates. Tonight, we're hosting this endorsement forum. So what does that mean? The way this will sort of work out is each candidate will get a 2-minute opening statement, a 2-minute response to each question, and then a 1-minute closing statement. And then if we have time, we're going to go into a lightning section if we still have time at the end of the meeting and sort of just pop off with yes or no questions. That some of these were submitted, some of them that the board came up with. Primarily, most of the board came up with these. This is not a formal debate, but rather just an opportunity to sort of understand what makes you distinctive as a representative. It's very early in this campaign, so people want to know who you are. And this is an opportunity to do that. If there's any questions, does anyone have any questions about the format or anything? Otherwise, we can jump right in. Okay, I will take that as no. All right. We won't be able to take audience questions, but the chat is open. We don't really have a lot of time to sort of throw in new questions, so I just wanted to put that out there. But anyways, opening statements. Who are you and why should we vote for you? So we have a predefined order. It was randomized. We're going to go ahead and start with Tony Desog. So you'll get 2 minutes. Let me get my timer ready here. And when you're ready, just start speaking and I'll start the timer.
My name is Tony Desog, and I am the Vice Mayor of Alameda. Over the 19 years I have served on Alameda City Council, I am most proud of my work in helping to convert Alameda's former military base to peaceful civilian uses. I am especially proud of this work because my mother is a survivor of the Nagasaki atomic bomb. As your Congress member, I will wholeheartedly support the agenda of the Democratic Party, especially for the vulnerable. My special areas of attention will be reducing significantly the U.S. military budget so as to shift spending towards universal health care, addressing climate change, making college and university and trade schools truly affordable so graduates aren't burdened by student loan debt. Dealing with climate change is especially important because here in Alameda, as you all know, we are uniquely affected by sea level rise because we are an island. But every city in this district is especially vulnerable to climate change in the form of sea level rise, groundwater rise, or hill areas at risk of climate-induced wildfires. My family's experience in dealing with the Nagasaki atomic bomb is what distinguishes me from most other Democrats. It helps explain the pride I take in helping convert Alameda's former military base. And it helps explain my emphasis on reducing our military budget. It is imperative that we significantly reduce our military budget spending to achieve universal health care, to address climate change, and to make college affordable. In Congress, I will continue the anti-war tradition of Starks, Dellums, and Lee. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to turn that down. That was a little loud. Thank you, Mr. Desog. Next up on our list is Denard Ingram.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for hosting this forum. My name is Denard Ingram. I am an Oakland resident here in West Oakland, a union man, and I stand proud in my queer identity. With over a decade of experience in social services, I've seen firsthand how frequently people struggle to have their basic needs met. I've seen this throughout my personal life and throughout my work experience. As a social worker for the city and as chair of the Oakland Housing and Rent Board, I also see the continued call for us to move away from career politicians. East Bay residents continue to experience a rise in food costs, housing costs, and job insecurities. And queer Americans across the country, even here in California, are fearing for our lives as we watch the few rights we've acquired be stripped away. Laws are made and passed without proper representation of us in the room. There should never be any laws or any laws drafted or passed without us. Nothing about us without us is a slogan that I think is aptly relevant to today's society. I made a choice to expand my civic engagement because I recognized a need for that increased representation at every level of government. We cannot continue using the same blueprint of how we choose and elect our officials and expecting different results when that same blueprint has shown that those officials are either unable or unwilling to prioritize the needs of the people over profits. It's time we reimagine our democracy, and that's why I want to be your congressman. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Tim Sanchez.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I live in Oakland. I grew up in East Oakland, product of the Oakland Unified School District. Father was a pastor, grandfather was a pastor before that. Grew up in the Fruitvale neighborhood. Life was difficult. I was the first in my family to go to college, but I became a teenage parent at the age of 19 and had to drop out and figure out how to support a young family. And like so many young Latinos in the district, I had to attend community college at night and struggle to try to figure out how to get to that next level on the rung of the ladder. Eventually got my degree at USF, went on to earn dual MBAs from the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley and Columbia Business School. I have spent 25 years working in various industries. I'm currently in aerospace. I've worked in finance, Silicon Valley startups, and I've been a small business owner in the Uptown district of Oakland up until 2020. After 9/11, like a lot of Americans, I felt the need to do something for the country and decided to pursue a commission in the U.S. Navy Reserves. Had so many family members and friends that have served in uniform, all of whom served as enlisted members of the military, but I wanted to be different. I wanted to become an officer, and so I sought out a commission, received one, and continue to serve 20 years later, part of that small number of just 8% of the officers in the Navy who happen to be Latino. But I decided to put all of that on hold to run for Congress, to represent a community that I love so much that it's afforded me so many opportunities. And I feel as a party, we've gotten away from talking about and addressing the issues that matter most to working class families. Economic opportunity is shrinking. That path to the middle class is shrinking every day. And with the new technology on the horizon, we need somebody to represent us who can address some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up is Latifah Simon.
It is so wonderful to be with you all tonight, and I want to say hello to my colleague candidates. I am so excited to be here tonight for a few reasons to let you know who I am. My lived experience has taught me so much. My lived experience coupled with my professional experience with over 30 years in the work on the ground, leading institutions, both in the CBO space and the government space, as an elected official, and most importantly, as a single mother, as a widow, someone who really understands that when the times get rough, we actually not only need solutions, we need to implement them. I've learned from my professional experience, the cavalry is not coming to save any of us, that it is us, our neighbors, our families, and our communities. We are the ones who have to represent ourselves, to be on the other side of the dais and outside with the bullhorn to make sure that our voices are heard. At 16, I became an organizer. As a teenager, with a baby on my hip, I led the Young Women's Freedom Center, the premier public safety organization in the country run for and by young women of color, to get folks jobs, to get folks opportunities. I'm currently an elected member of the Bay Area Rapid Transit District, and I brought $3 billion home during COVID back to the Bay Area Rapid Transit to ensure that our trains continue to run. I can't wait to be a part of this conversation so that you can learn more about me, what I plan to do, all of my successes, and also really talk about our struggles. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm excited to be a part of this community.
Thank you so much. And next up is Dr. Jennifer Tran.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for having us here. And I would also like to share the excitement I have to be on this wonderful slate of just panel with really qualified public servants. And just to introduce myself, my name is Dr. Jennifer Tran, and I'm running for Congress in California District 12. And the reason why I'm running is to bring sensible solutions to our most pressing issues. As an ethnic studies professor, a small business leader, and a community organizer, I have deep roots in Oakland and the East Bay. Growing up, my family and others faced daunting obstacles, often avoiding confrontation due to fear of being perceived as ungrateful. I remember living with 11 people in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment because my family are refugees. And while my parents toiled for 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, in our family-owned nail salon, these hardships fueled violence, both within our home as well as the streets. But these challenges also propelled me to dedicate my life to serving others and finding solutions. The hard work ethic that my parents taught me allowed me and inspired me to pursue an urban planning degree at UC San Diego and eventually carry on with my PhD from USC. And currently, as the professor in Cal State East Bay, I mentor and teach first-generation college students, working class students of color, and I stress the urgency of application of theory to practice. And as the president of the Oakland Vietnamese Chamber of Commerce, I work with the other chambers of commerce to demand and secure funds at the national, state, and local level to ensure that there's language access and culturally competent technical assistance to our communities. And the reason why I'm running is because I am a proven leader during moments of crisis. I understand the complex institutions and power structures we must navigate and leverage to solve the problems that we face in the East Bay. We deserve an experienced community leader with bold and realistic plans to fix our broken systems.
Thank you so much. Okay, all right. So our first question is, sorry, give me 1 second. I'm running two things at the same time here. An issue that you'll likely hear, oh, sorry, I'm skipping ahead. We've long had an incumbent representing our district who's been incredibly effective. If elected, what actions will you take in your first days in Congress, including relationships you'll initiate, committee positions you're vying for, in order to build the level of effectiveness and notoriety expected from you from your constituency? You have very big shoes to fill as freshman congressman. And so in the order that we randomly ordered right here, first up is Denard Ingram. Thank you.
Thank you for the honor of being first up on the mound. You are correct. We do have very huge, there are some big shoes to fill. And I think for me, the priority is really picking up that mantle that Congresswoman Lee has built over the last almost 2.5 decades and carrying that forward in a progressive way. One of the priorities that I think that will help really push forward a lot of the progressive ideals that many of us likely agree on and want to see is really tapping into the representation that we currently have in our government. A lot of the things that we're asking for, have been asking for, affordable health care, deeper investments into affordable housing, strengthening our social safety networks. A lot of these things are not new. We've been asking for them for a while, but yet we run into roadblocks even within our own party. And so I think it's important that we galvanize both millennial and Gen Z voters around the issues that we think are important. And that translates into different folks in those seats, that translates to a larger voter base, that translates to us having folks both out in the streets and at the policy table, shaping and crafting the policies that actually benefit the people. One of the things that Congresswoman Lee, or actually two things that Congresswoman Lee has done that I absolutely adore and value very much, was calling for the return of the authorization of war to Congress and removing that power from the president alone. And also Congresswoman Lee was one of the founding members of the LGBTQ caucus in Congress. And I think it's time that the East Bay have some queer representation in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up on our list here is Tim Sanchez. Go ahead.
Great. I would add, not only do I have big shoes to fill with all of the great work that Congresswoman Lee has done, but even before her with Congressman Ron Dellums. Both have been loud, progressive voices that have stood tall, even when they didn't have support within their own party. We saw that with Ron Dellums and what he did to downsize the military, and certainly with Barbara Lee standing up and being that lone vote against giving the president authorization. I will tell you that it's highly unlikely that a freshman member of Congress would get a seat on the Ways and Means Committee or Appropriations. So setting those dream committees aside, given my military background, I would say that the Armed Services Committee is one area that I would love to sit on. And the reason why is because anybody who's actually worn the uniform knows how much waste exists in our military. And the defense contracting industry that takes billions out of taxpayer dollars to fund projects that are never going to get returned on time or on budget. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us to fund the social programs that we need. There are so many great ideas out there, so many great programs that we can't get passed through Congress because of a lack of funding, but we can do that if we tackle the Department of Defense. It's the only agency in the cabinet that has failed to pass an audit. And I would love to be on that committee. As someone who wore the uniform, who's seen it from the inside, we can cut our budget by 30% overnight and not lose our ability to defend our country. Spending $1 trillion to fund our war machine is obscene. And I would love to serve on that committee so we can bring some of that back home to the 12th Congressional.
Thank you so much. Next up is Latifah Simon.
Thank you so much. I love the question because so much about running and becoming a freshman, being sworn in January 2025, is showing the party what you can do. And I'm super clear that as a candidate in this race, even in just the last 5 months, the endorsements from the Democratic leadership of this state, from all the unions who have supported me, to the mamas, to the low-income folks, to the homeless mothers, to the Sister Warrior Coalition of 5,000 previously incarcerated mothers in the state of California, but not to mention the money that I have raised to set up an infrastructure. The DCCC, the national, they are watching. You can say whatever committee you want to be on, but you will not get any committee unless a committee that you want, unless the party understands that you are ready to go. Really ready to go. The Congressional Progressive Caucus has endorsed my campaign. Over 115 progressive members of the Democratic Party within Congress have said, yes, we want you to be our colleague. So it is about organizing and knocking on 400 plus doors when you get in across the aisle, which I've shown that I do in the Bay Area. I've been able to work and move processes forward with like-minded folks and folks that I don't agree with. It's about organizing to make sure while I'm campaigning, but once I'm in office, that I have what it takes to not only be a strong freshman, but a leader in the party and a leader in Congress, and I'm ready to go.
Thank you so much. Next up on our list is Tony Daysog. Whenever you're ready. Oh, you're muted, Tony. Oh, Tony, you're muted. There we go.
Thank you. If elected to Congress, the two committees that I would love to serve on is first, the Armed Services Committee. About 4 months ago or so, there was a great segment on Jon Stewart where he was grilling an Assistant Secretary of Defense, where he was pointing out to her that the Defense Department has failed 5 audits. So in failing 5 audits, what that means is by definition, they really don't know where the money is going. So we need to not only lower the expenditures in the Defense Department and transfer the money to more socially productive uses. We not only need to lower the spending, but we also need to keep a careful watch. And as a council member in my 19 years, that's one of the things that I've done in order to keep our city hall running well. So serving on the Armed Services Committee would be great. The second committee that I would love to serve on is the Ways and Means Committee, because in order to achieve universal health care, in order to fund all the social safety net programs, it's not just about cutting the military budget and then transitioning the savings to these socially productive programs. It's not just about cutting expenditures, but it's also about changing our tax code. The tax code that we have in place for the most part was cemented in the 1986 tax code when the highest marginal rate was set in 1986 at 38%. Today it's at 37%. We actually need to go back to what Reagan did in 1982, 3, 4, and 5, when the highest tax code, the highest marginal rate was 50%. And that 50%, if we change the tax code, make it more progressive and make it more fair, we not only transition savings from cutting defense, but we also generate revenue that we should be generating in the first place to pay for these socially productive uses. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then finally, Dr. Jennifer Tran.
Yes, thank you for this excellent question, because 2 minutes isn't enough to share where our vision and our plans. And should I have the honor to serve as your Congress member, I am really excited to serve on important committees that extend the work that I currently already do, particularly around education and workforce, small business, and oversight. What makes our Representative Barbara Lee a champion for our communities is not only does she have expertise in her areas, but she is able to bridge. The biggest problem in DC right now is tribalism and paralysis due to ideological divides. And it takes someone who carries the values, but also the pragmatism, the sensible solutions that I am bringing to this race, to this campaign, to bring working solutions to our working families. I am not attached to ideology. I am really excited to build bipartisan legislation so that we can move the needle on racial and social equity in this country. And my priorities for this race and what really motivated me is our communities. Our communities are in crisis and they can't wait. And that's why public safety, homelessness, education, and support for small businesses who have been impacted by the pandemic and have not had a voice throughout this time period, not just in Oakland, but across the East Bay. Alameda is a beacon of hope for many of our community members, and we want to extend those opportunities so that other people have that opportunity to thrive as well. So I'm really excited to continue the work that Representative Barbara Lee has led on around fixing our supply chain challenges, advancing a care economy, and addressing the challenges that are to come and opportunities as a result of technology and automation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, next question. So an issue that you'll likely hear from a lot of your prospective constituents is on crime and public safety in our communities. And there was in the San Francisco Chronicle, they stated that in Oakland alone, homicide is up 37%, robberies are up 30%, car break-ins are up more than 40%, while vehicle thefts doubled in the first half of this year compared to 2019. And also, according to the New York Times, guns accounted for nearly 20% of all deaths among youth nationwide in 2021. And in Oakland, gun violence accounted for at least 14 of Oakland's 16 youth homicides in 2020 and 2021. So my question is, while work is being done in the local level, from aggressive police recruitment and technology to pilot programs to basic guaranteed income programs, what more can be done at a federal level and in Congress to help address some of the trends that are heavily impacting our communities in our district, but also have nationwide implications, mostly gun violence? And I think we'll start off with, in the order, we have Tim Sanchez as our first question. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, I mean, look, we're at a crisis level right now. When you take a look at, as you laid out the statistics in Oakland, the police force is stretched thin. And when I talk to small business owners in the Fruitvale neighborhood where I grew up, or vendors who are working in the streets selling their goods, they're terrified. They're terrified. And we are understaffed in the city of Oakland with police. Many will say that it's a local issue, that the federal government doesn't have a role. I disagree wholeheartedly. I think when the city of Oakland is facing a budget deficit of $300 million, it's going to be nearly impossible to expand the police force. When I talk to folks in my old neighborhood, they want more cops, not less, but they want cops who they can trust, cops who they know aren't going to threaten their young children when they walk down the street. We all know that he or she who controls the budget controls the rules. And I think there's a role for the federal government to provide additional funding to cities like Oakland to expand their police force, but tie it to rules that will push through and allow for reform within the police system and the police model. Some of the things we can do to help bridge that gap and rebuild the trust between people of color who live in the East Side and in the West Side. We can provide and change the FHA mortgage rules, increase the limits to allow police officers to actually get a mortgage to live in the neighborhood that they're serving. So that way they can have a better understanding of the community that they can serve. Those are some of the just one idea things that we can do to be innovative, to increase an awareness among our police force. We also need to expand the precinct system within the city. So that way these police officers are working in the neighborhoods and they're there all the time. Those are things we can do at the federal level that can be tied to funding. There's so many innovative solutions that we can tie to increase funding, but we need more cops on the street, not less.
Thank you so much. Next up on my list is Latifah Simon.
Thank you so much. I, like many folks who are in our candidate pool for this district, were around in the 80s and the 90s in the Bay Area. And I, grew up in a family deeply affected by the criminal justice system and addiction. Having run award-winning public safety programs that I have led, that have reduced recidivism amongst 90% of the populations that I've run, from the award-winning Back on Track program to, again, the Young Women's Freedom Center. I have created jobs, but I've also been very clear of what works and what doesn't work. We know that public safety, there is a variety, there is an ecosystem of opportunities that are critical for young men and young women who are out here to be able to leave the life and be able to get into secure opportunities. One, it's about pushing our labor community to make sure that they're hiring. Two, of course, it's about making sure that we have a police force that is doing its job, that when my grandmother calls, they come, but they're also not violating the civil rights of her uncle, or my uncle or a cousin who's in the home. When I ran for BART board, I initiated an idea of creating an ambassador program. It was the first of its kind 7 years ago here in the Bay Area. 9 jurisdictions have adopted that program. And I am happy to say on BART, while not a perfect system, the response time, because of my ambassador program, is 4.7 minutes for an armed police officer. You tell me where you live, if there is a home invasion, not to mention the BART is 5 counties deep, how long will it take you to get a police officer to come? Creating solutions, community-based and sworn solutions, are extremely essential. And as somebody who has, again, run award-winning public safety programs, working with public and private partnerships to ensure that we're addressing root causes is the way to go. It's why when I was 26 years old, I got a MacArthur Genius Fellowship for being an incredible, thoughtful leader in the space of public safety. Very excited about this question.
Thank you so much. Next on my list is Dr. Jennifer Tran.
Thank you for this question, as this is a cornerstone issue for me in this race. This issue is personal for me as an API, as a queer API woman. The pandemic really affected our communities. The API hate and also ongoing violence that our communities experience is personal for me. Last month, my 80-year-old uncle and his wife were held up at gunpoint with my 2 nephews, 3 years and 3 months old, while their home was being burglarized. This is not an exception. It has become the norm, and we cannot accept that. As an ethnic studies professor, someone who's born and raised in Oakland, I am deeply rooted in values around solidarity, around healing and restoration. We have reached a point in our society in which we are not able to acknowledge the experiences of our communities, of people leaving banks, leaving businesses and being followed home, being afraid if this is a place they want to raise their children anymore. And as someone who served on the Community Policing Advisory Board, I understand that the COPS funding for community-oriented programs, the billions of dollars that were invested at the federal level didn't make it to the East Bay. We have these visions for coordination, but where's the oversight? Even when there's appropriation. And so it is my purpose for running, and I am driven to making sure that we have justice with accountability, that we are sending a message to our young people that we care about them, but at the same time, that we need compassion and order. And that is the candidate that I am, bringing sensible solutions to our most pressing issues, but facing them head on rather than skirting around. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, I have Tony Dasog.
Thank you. I hope my audio is on. The way I look at the issue of crime and the role of Congress in helping out local governments is this. In the city of Alameda, when it comes to violent crime, the city of Alameda's police department has an incredible 85% clearance rate, 85% in the city of Alameda, based upon FBI data. That's for violent crime. Now, when it comes to the same thing in the city of San Leandro and in the city of Oakland, the clearance rate is only 30%, 35% or so. And this is a data-driven area where I think we need to help out the local police departments, because there's not only current crime, but there's crimes that are just being solved. And so we need to have a federal program that helps local governments, police departments like those in Oakland and San Leandro, begin to resolve these uncleared crimes so that they too can have a higher clearance rates similar to what Alameda enjoys. So that's the first thing, is federal programs to help local governments in beefing up the staffing to focus on clearing unsolved cases. I think the issue of helping out local governments in terms of improving staffing, I share that along with, as voiced by candidate Sanchez. One area where I would certainly focus on when it comes to beefing up staffing is beefing up the mental health outreach services. That's something that we in Alameda are really proud of doing, of implementing. So we're just not sending out cops on 911 mental health related calls, but a focused team. And then finally, we do need to incentivize police officers to join our ranks. In Alameda, we set aside $75,000 per cop. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, Denard Ingram.
Thank you all very much. So I think I'm going to differ a little bit from my colleagues on the panel. So in my opening statement, you heard me talk about kind of moving away from this same blueprint that we've used. Public safety is absolutely a very valid concern for many people. As you've heard my colleagues mention, many people across the East Bay are frightened, scared to go to the bank, go to the store, even just existing in your home. But my position is not so one-sided. I believe that if the police is what people are wanting, then there's a way to go about doing that that doesn't continue to funnel money, much like how we were talking about throwing money at our defense budget. We cannot continue to just throw money at our police departments without seeing the results that we want. Oakland Police Department, I think the current budget is somewhere around 700 and something million. I think Alameda's is around 43 million, right? So we cannot continue to have this knee-jerk reaction to the symptom of crime without addressing the root causes of those crimes. And so one of my policy proposals is that if we're going to allow police departments to continue to address this issue in terms of public safety, we have to look at alternative means, removing certain things from police departments, making sure that our police officers look like the communities and come from the communities they serve. But in addition, we cannot move forward without addressing the root causes of those crimes. People are struggling to have their basic needs met. People need food, people need housing, people need resources in order to survive. And we cannot continue to have this very unbalanced approach where we're prioritizing police departments, but not the needs of the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So next up, climate crisis. So in our district, we're so-called feeling the heat from this climate crisis, from unprecedented rainfall and flooding last year to the impacts of wildfire risks all around us. Congress took significant steps towards addressing those climate crisis issues in the past year with the Inflation Reduction Act. So my question for everyone is, in your view, what is the next for continuing the momentum on climate change at the federal level? Please be specific if you can be. And first up on our list for this question is Latifah Simon.
Thank you so much. I can't even tell you how happy I am that you asked this question. Many of you know that in 2014, I lost my husband to blood cancer, and he was born and raised in Richmond, California, very much adjacent to the Chevron plant. And we know that the highest rates of blood cancer in the Bay Area are in Contra Costa County. I raised his 12-year-old daughter. I am a single mom, and I blame so much of his illness and me taking care of him on the effects of the oil industry and of folks who are running corporations not worried about Black and brown and poor people around this country. So here's what's important, and I'll be quick here. The idea that we have passed the Inflation Reduction Act is one possible opportunity. We have to look at the largest climate legislation in US history, and we need to be extremely aggressive and ambitious in pushing forth measures that enact a Green New Deal, which would put millions of people to work at ensuring that our nation, that we can breathe air, and we create an infrastructure that is focused on ending water pollution, reducing the air crisis, and fighting for what I believe is the intertwined economic, social, racial, and climate crisis crippling this country. I know that with my good colleagues in Congress right now, that we will, in our lifetime, the clock is ticking, move forth and pass a Green New Deal to get millions working to reduce the realities that we're living in now. Folks are dying and the world is on fire. The number one issue facing this country is the climate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, I have Dr. Jennifer Tran.
Thank you for this question. As someone who's trained in regional urban planning, I understand how historically our systems have worked interlocking and intersectionally to bring us to the moment we're at right now. In terms of what we're witnessing is social engineering of our societies for profit. And that direction has come at the expense of our working families and poor communities of color. And I think that in order for us to be able to address climate change, we can't just think about what is the most ambitious or radical idea, but thinking about transition. There is power in small, and that's why I lead the small businesses through the Chamber of Commerce. And also I teach in ethnic studies to create those pipelines from our educational institutions to the workforce. And so a green transition is absolutely necessary, and we need to do it in a way that meets communities where they're at. So specifically, I take a small business and local approach to prioritizing job training programs like Representative Lee did with the National Apprentice Act, being able to provide well-paying jobs for our young people and also our small businesses to participate in that. I am interested, once I start and working on the small business and educational workforce committees, to provide tax credits to reduce upfront costs for green energy upgrades, as well as passing benefits for small businesses to transition into the green economy. And lastly, advocate for additional tax rebates for landlords who invest in renewable energy installments. And California has been leading the way, but unless we have federal partnership, then we won't be able to make the impact in a visible, measurable way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, I have Mr. Tony Daysong.
Well, thank you. As I said from the outset, because the city I represent is an island, we are by definition uniquely and especially affected by climate change in the form of sea level rise. But as I also said, every city is affected by climate change in this district. Sea level rise, groundwater rise, or hill areas that are at risk of fire as a result of climate-induced wildfires. So we need to act, and we need to act boldly. The reality, though, is action is happening locally and not at the federal level yet. In Alameda, for example, we adopted the Climate Action Resiliency Plan, which I voted for. One element of the Climate Action Resiliency Plan was increasing our sewerage fees. And we increased our sewerage fees in order to pay to improve our underwater pipeline sewerage system, because we had found that our issue is not just increasing sea level rises at the shorelines, but the way in which the increase in sea level also affects our groundwater, because the groundwater is tidally influenced. So if elected to Congress, when it comes to climate action plan, I want to make sure that there is robust federal funding to help local governments improve their infrastructure to deal with climate change, particularly sea level rise. But I want to make clear about when it comes to infrastructure, if elected to Congress, what I would prioritize is nature-based solutions over hard infrastructure. So I would want Congress not to so much support creating seawalls everywhere, because the problem with seawalls is that all it does is it just shifts the wave action from one place to another. So Foster City has seawalls, but their waves are not going to come to Alameda. But instead, we should have natural-based solutions where we allow for, in fact, the tides to take over some of the beaches, for example. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, I have Denard Ingram.
Thank you, Zach. So we've heard about the Green New Deal and investments into our climate change, and that this is a very pressing issue. And I would say climate change in and of itself is not only just a pressing issue for everyone, but specifically it is a pressing issue for millennials and Gen Z Americans. this is the planet that we have inherited. And we have to form coalitions and be collaborative in our approaches to how we address it. And it cannot be, the same things that we've heard regurgitated in our government for decades. We need real solutions, things like increasing our reliance on renewable energies, moving away from our reliance on oil and coal-based forms of energy, looking at innovative new ways for dealing with some natural and man-made disasters, things like oil spills. There's a lot of research showing benefits to utilizing things like fungi and mushrooms and how those can benefit in cleaning up oil spills, deconstructing plastics. We have to expand our approach and looking at new ways and new approaches to addressing these issues, and not relying on the same thing that we've been doing, because clearly it's not working. As someone mentioned earlier, the world is on fire. And not only is it on fire, we're drowning slowly. We're sinking into the ocean. We're experiencing more earthquakes, more shifts in our planet. We only have one. And if we aren't taking care of it, we don't know of any other source where we can go. And so in order to do this, this is why part of my platform is, the platform is reimagining our democracy. We have to consider new, innovative ways to address this problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, we have Tim Sanchez.
Well, I would first start out by saying that I agree with everything that my colleagues have said, but I would go a step further or look at this slightly differently. I'm too supportive of the Green New Deal, although I think it's simply at this point a resolution, a declaration. It needs more teeth, needs a lot of work. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I look forward to getting back to Congress to make that happen. The Infrastructure Act was another great example of how the government has taken the initiative to the next level. The problem we're facing right now, though, is that we've done a pretty good job in the United States. Our country, and in California in particular, has done a great job with the environment. Unfortunately, the world isn't the United States. A lot of what we're seeing and experiencing with climate change is a result of what's happening in other parts of the world, China and India in particular. Unfortunately, we can't go in and establish laws and regulations for those countries. So how are we going to get them to come along with us? We're going to follow the playbook, and we should follow the playbook we've already established. Look at what we've done in Silicon Valley in taking technology developed here in our own backyard and spreading it and expanding and influencing the entire world with the adoption of technology created in our backyard. We've done it with film, entertainment. You go on industry after industry. We need to do the same with green jobs, green technology. I think that the CHIPS Act is one example of a tremendous public-private partnership where we put up $50 billion. It was matched by the semiconductor industry because we provided incentives. Look, folks, we work in a model that's based on capitalism, so you have to work within those rules. We need to fund new technology that can be expanded and adopted around the world. And the way we're going to do that, to get those countries to come along, is to develop that technology here and spread it around the world. And that's why I'm in favor of increasing the size and frequency of public-private partnerships when it comes to green technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much. For the next few questions, I want to introduce our club's VP of Activities and Secretary, Meredith Hoskin, to take over and ask the following questions.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. All your responses have been it's been really nice to hear your perspective on all this. So my first question is a two-part question about families. Last year, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, triggering many states to pass local legislation banning abortion and women's access to health care, and opening conversations of similar legislation nationwide. Additionally, the Washington Post recently published an op-ed outlining all the family and childcare legislation that has been proposed, supported, and in some instances passed but not enacted, and a lot of it bipartisan. This includes things like infant and maternal mortality rates, particularly among Black women, and researching that. the child tax credit expansion, and then a universal tax exempt parental leave and family savings account. And as we know, national paid family leave was left out of the Build Back Better plan. So we want to hear, what are your plans to reinstate and protect women's rights to healthcare? And what are you going to do to get more legislation actually passed and enacted that supports pregnant constituents, families, and babies? Now, please be mindful. We all know that you support a women's rights to choose. That's why you're a Democratic candidate. Just be specific and know that these aren't women's issues as they impact everyone. And we're going to start with Dr. Jennifer Tran.
Thank you for that question, Meredith. It's, as you said, we wouldn't be here if we weren't pro-choice, and gender equality is far from achieved in the US. And although it's easy for us to think about this issue through a broad lens, the way that government and states are addressing women's rights varies from state to state. And to your point around the impacts of Roe v. Wade, it doesn't just affect women and the reproductive rights of women, but families and also LGBT families as well, who are impacted by the lack of access for gender affirming care, right? So we need to propose and advocate for legislation that provides equal access to coverage in our Health Insurance Act, and to broaden, when we talk about women's rights and family rights, to see it as a public health crisis, as long as our communities are unable to provide for their families, which also includes universal childcare and senior care, then our children and our families will not have the basic access that we need to be able to support our families. And this family notion is going to be very challenging as we have attacks against LGBT communities, right? In terms of defining what constitutes family, but family is people's right to choose and right to organize. And the biggest challenge and opportunity that I see, given my experience working with diverse stakeholders and folks with different ideological beliefs, is the importance of working in collaboration rather than silos. We live in the Bay Area, in which we share a lot of ideological beliefs, but we need to be able to work across departments to be able to normalize this conversation that we're having here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Tony Desog.
Well, great. Let me answer this question in two ways. First, number one, when it comes to women's right to choose, I believe I will be joining all of the candidates tonight in saying that both the Senate and the Congress must pass laws that codify the right to choose as on a national basis, and that Congress is in a position to do so if we get enough Democrats and forward-thinking Republicans. We can make a change in the Washington D.C. So passing a federal legislation that codifies the right to choose is absolutely important. Number two, when it comes to helping families, let's go back to the child tax credit that you mentioned. The child tax credit was part of Biden's ARPA program. And what the child tax credit did, what Biden did, was to increase it roughly from $2,000 per child to $3,000 per child. And guess what was the impact of that? The impact of that was an incredible reduction in child poverty rates. Unfortunately, the child tax credit increase was temporary, and that it has now gone back to the pre-COVID rates of $2,000 per child. And we all saw the news this past week about what the impact of that was on the child poverty on the child poverty rate. Again, that has exploded as a result of the decline in the child tax credit. What that tells you, though, is that Washington, D.C., when it's pushing the right levers, can make positive social changes that helps families and communities. And so the second thing that I would do is increase the child tax credit back to $3,000 plus. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Denard Ingram.
Thank you, Meredith. This is another one of those questions and topics that I feel like, this isn't a new issue. And we have heard many of the arguments. We've heard people screaming over it for decades. I believe Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, if I'm not mistaken. And there was no action to codify this. We have to have people representing us who are about representing the needs of the people, not when it is politically convenient, but who are tasked and who are dedicated to doing what is right and creating a stage and a country and a world, really, where everyone can feel they are protected. Roe v. Wade is gone, and we have an opportunity to create new legislation that not only furthers that right of a woman to choose their own healthcare without the government deciding for them, but also to be more inclusive and in defining, as someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Dr. Tran, this moving away from the stereotypical definition of what a family is and what that looks like, because that can look very different. Queer folks around this country were screaming about what would happen if Roe v. Wade was overturned. And as soon as that was done, we saw an increase in legislation attacking trans youth and their parents. We saw an increase in anti-queer and anti-gay legislation, focusing specifically or primarily on trans and gender nonconforming folks. That isn't by accident, that is by design. And we have to be able and willing to stand up in those positions and talk and speak truth to power, in that how we define this, and in this moment, we make sure that we are covering as many and protecting as many of our residents as possible.
Thank you. Tim Sanchez.
Great. Well, the first thing we need to do is, it's been mentioned earlier, we need to codify a woman's right to choose into law. It's got to happen. We're not going to overturn or change the makeup of the Supreme Court anytime soon. And so the only way we can do this is on a federal national level. We've seen in Kansas, we've seen in other states that even states that are red states want access to a woman's right to choose and healthcare that could provide those services. But I think we need it at the federal level, a blanket law that can ensure that every woman has access to healthcare. Right now, we're facing a crisis, though, when it comes to the number of doctors that exist that can treat people effectively. I met with a number of doctors just this week, and they're fighting over Medicare payments between the specialists and family practitioners and pediatricians. And that's why I think we need a tax credit that focuses exclusively on family healthcare, children healthcare in particular, where we can carve out a portion for families on a means test that they can use explicitly on receiving healthcare for their young children. It has to be pulled out separately from the existing payment system that we have, because there's just not enough payment or incentives for doctors. We also need to create special incentives for med students to choose a path of pediatrics instead of necessarily pursuing other specialties that may pay more. There are lots of things we can do to tweak the system, but we need to codify a woman's right to choose first and foremost. That's going to require that we take back the House, we maintain the Senate and the White House, but it's going to require that the senators take a bold leap and get rid of the filibuster, because we will not be able to pass a law to give a woman's right to choose unless senators are bold enough to get rid of the filibuster.
Excellent. And then lastly, Latifa Simon.
Thank you. I agree with everything that the other candidates have said. the comprehensive idea that a woman should have self-determination over her body is one that is so deeply held in the Democratic Party. I gotta say that, at 26, as the executive director of the Young Women's Freedom Center, as a doula, as I helped a young woman who had been transferred from juvenile hall in San Francisco to our county hospital deliver a child who was shackled while she was giving birth. She was 16 at the time. To see that child be directly delivered to direct services, and having to take that young woman back to juvenile hall, I led a campaign that successfully ended the practice of shackling teenagers in the state of California who were given birth in juvenile facilities. That had prompted, again, a lifelong battle to ensure that folks would have the most comprehensive healthcare opportunities. Being a mother and being someone who has committed my life to the freedom of young women, especially underrepresented young women, being the only person in this race endorsed by Emily's List. In fact, I was the first candidate of all candidates this season to be endorsed by Emily's List, which is a pro-choice institution trying to force the conversation about getting pro-choice women elected. Being in deep conversations with NARAL and the leadership of Planned Parenthood, we know that when we're going into Congress as a freshman, that we must have coalition deeply behind us. This is a #1 priority, a very focused priority of the Democratic Party. And like my colleague said, we must secure the House. We must secure the Senate. And we need to make sure that we are working post-primary to ensure that every progressive member of Congress around the country who is a candidate, is going to win. That is how we protect a woman's right to choose. And in fact, that is my focus.
Thank you very much. All right, well, we're gonna wrap up the Q&A portion with one last question on immigration. The continued influx of migrants to the southern border of our state will be a key topic in the 2024 general election. Cities and states are using massive amounts of local resources to help support migrant arrivals, but you hear about the dire conditions in New York and detention centers across the country, as these resources can't keep up. In fact, state officials in New York have started pointing the finger at the Biden administration and Congress for not doing more to help the situation. Being specific, what new ideas for legislations and programs do you have to help manage the massive increase in immigration? And keep in mind, this has been a long-standing issue that can't seem to be done right. What is your fresh thinking? And we will start with Tony Dazog.
Thank you very much. The United States must continue to be a beacon of hope and a place where dreams can be fulfilled by immigrants from all walks of earth, whether they're from Latin America or other parts of the earth. Now, the challenges that places like New York City or Chicago are facing are real. And so in order to address those challenges, one specific thing that we need to implement, I believe, is a Remain in Texas and a Remain in Mexico policy, so that we transition immigrants in a more orderly fashion. As part of the Remain in Texas, Remain in Mexico policy that I would pursue, though, is I would also increase the number of supportive services so that we're just not sending more police-based border security guards, but we're sending more individuals who are trained in mental health and other medical health-related services to assist families make this kind of transition. The second specific policy that I would seek to implement is the root causes, understanding the root causes by working with countries in Central America as well as South America to figure out how can we deal with crime and how can we help those governments deal with crime and violence there? How can we help those governments and people there and businesses there increase jobs more? I think that's the second thing is is dealing with the root causes as the second thing. And the first thing is having a policy of remain in Texas and remaining in Mexico, but buffeted by improved services. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up is Denard Ingram.
Thank you, Meredith. So as you mentioned, yeah, this is another one of those issues that's been going on for a while. And I think my answer will be similar in regard to the approaches that we use. We have to embrace more progressive, more innovative approaches to the immigration issue. One of those things, and I agree with Vice Mayor Daysong, in sending more supportive services or putting more supportive services in place and making sure we are engaging immigrants, number one, from a place of dignity and respect. And that involves also not necessarily relying on facilities that are very akin to detention facilities for people who are seeking safety, who are seeking relief for them and their families. So that is one area I think that we can work on as a country and from a legislative perspective. Also, not relying so much, again, on law enforcement, looking at ways that we can reduce the need for law enforcement at our border, and maybe utilizing those resources elsewhere. But then also too thinking about other forms of immigration, like our DACA recipients. One of the things I did was write an amendment that would allow for DACA recipients to have a more streamlined process. And I think that same can be said for our immigration process overall, making it more streamlined, not necessarily so that just anyone can get in, but not making it so cumbersome that folks literally will risk their lives to illegally cross over, when we should be operating from a perspective that no one on this planet is an illegal anywhere, whether they are documented or undocumented. Thank you.
Thanks. Next up is Tim Sanchez.
I think it's important, first and foremost, that Americans as a whole understand that people don't want to leave their families and their neighborhoods and their villages and their towns. In a perfect world, they would love to live where they're at. It's incredibly challenging leaving everything you know to come to a country that you know is going to mistreat you, have been forced to speak a language that you don't know. And so what are some of the things we can do? I think if we look back in our history in recent years, in the 60s and 70s, we operated something called the Bracero program, incredibly successful, where we allowed seasonal agriculture workers to come into this country to work the crops, work the fields, and go back home when the season was over. They were allowed to come and go, and they did it legally. That's something we need to revisit. We also need to do a much better job to increase our budgetary resources by a factor of 4 to 5 times what we're spending now to provide legal counsel to people who are seeking asylum, timely legal counsel, and also to work with our partners, Mexico and the Central American nations, to allow us to operate hearings, immigration hearings with judges out of our consulates, out of our embassies, so we can address the cases individually in the countries that these individuals are living at, rather than forcing them to risk their lives and risk the lives of their children to trek across the border to be exploited by coyotes in order to come here and maybe get a hearing 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road. We can do a much better job in a very short period of time if we just throw more resources towards giving people the opportunity to have their case heard in the country in which they currently reside. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next up, Latifah Simon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the question. It means a lot. My eldest daughter, who's 27, her father is first generation American, and his family is from El Salvador. And I will never forget hearing the story of her grandmother, Amina's grandmother, talking about walking over 1,000 miles to reach the border. And one of the things she told me, again, as a young woman after me delivering Layla, was that a mother would never put her child in the water if the land was safe. And my work over the past 30 years has been really very much focused on making sure that folks who are not safe can get to safety. And I've supported HR 6, the American Dream, and the Promise Act of 2021. We know that we need better paths to lawful permanent residency for dreamers, for temporary protected status workers and recipients, and deferred enforcement departures recipients. It's clear that while this has been a priority for Democrats, we have not gotten there. And like my colleagues have said earlier, it is so important that we get the House back so that we're able to push through thoughtful legislation. But in the interim, as a member of the CSU Board of Trustees, that we create in our educational institutions, that we create opportunities for migrants, for folks who are working to get papers, for them to have opportunities to live lives deeply focused on a pathway to citizenship. In 2021, the House passed HR 1603, and that was the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And I supported that. And many of us were out in the streets, during that time and continuously making sure that we're very clear as Black, as brown folks, as HPI folks, as queer folks, as straight folks, that we believe that Americans should live by what is promised. Give us your homeless, give us your weak, give us your migrants.
Thank you. And lastly, Dr. Jennifer Tran.
I'm really glad that this is the final question, as Representative Lee has been an advocate and champion for immigrants and refugees during her tenure and under her leadership, standing up for humanitarian migrants as well as DACA recipients. And this nation, as many of my colleagues have discussed, has touted itself to be a nation of immigrants. And yet, this nation has been founded based on displacement, based on dehumanization, and also marking who belongs and who doesn't belong. And so this seat is extremely important in order to pass legislation that challenges the notion of us versus them. Right? And as a comparative ethnic studies professor at Cal State East Bay, I work in a Hispanic Serving Institute, but also in Alameda County, in which more than 1/3 of our constituents are foreign born. And the steps in order for us to protect our communities is to move against this narrative of us versus them in terms of immigrants are coming into the country, but most of our families are of mixed citizenship status. And so some of the issues that I would be championing is raising the refugee and political asylum limitations. 2 million of Vietnamese Americans are in the US because of democratic support for refugees after the fall of Saigon and in the 80s. And when we think about the work of ICE and how it has been able to separate and force separation of families, that's connected to our prison system. And we need to reform it in a way that allows people to not only wait, but also be able to pursue professions so that they can advocate for their communities as well, so that we are working in collaboration. And so with immigration refugees, this is a deeply personal issue that I will continue to do if elected as your Congress member.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. That wraps up our Q&A portion of this discussion. It's very hard to provide, not to provide any commentary on some of the things you said, but I feel the audience on this call finds it all very valuable. So thank you very much. We're going to actually jump straight into closing remarks given timing. But beforehand, I'm going to just do a quick plug to people on the call. This is the first of our series of upcoming candidate forums and endorsement meetings for the primary season. If you've attended this meeting, that actually makes you eligible if you're interested in voting in our upcoming endorsement meetings. All you simply have to do is join the club. So if you go to, oh my God, Zach, alamedademocrats.org. Memberships start at, $15 to $25 for the year. So be sure to pay your dues, and then you'll get to help us decide which candidate that we want to support. And if you think about it in the larger scheme of things, our endorsement too, given we're chartered within the California Democratic Party, can help influence the party at large. So if you feel like you want the party to be going in a certain direction, this is your opportunity to have a say. All right, now with that, we're going to jump into closing remarks. We're going to give each candidate 1 minute. I'm sorry. This is just let us know what you'd like us to leave with about you based on the topics we've discussed with you this evening. So running through our order, we're going to start with Tim Sanchez this time.
Well, thank you. This was fun. And I wish the best to all of my colleagues who are running for office as well. We're all part of the same team, so I wish you well. Look, I would say I know the history and tradition in the East Bay and in our district in particular. A lot of our local officials have come from the world of activism or through the nonprofit pathway. That's not my life story. I listened early on to some of my school teachers growing up in Oakland who introduced me to so many other opportunities, and I pursue that in my life. So that's not my life story, but I do think we need a fresh set of eyes to look at some of these important issues we're facing today and issues in the future, but look at it from a new perspective. I'm a proud progressive, proud Democrat. I know I don't have all the answers, but what we're doing now, it ain't working. And with your help, I look to make history by becoming the first Latino elected to Congress from the entire Bay Area. It's never happened before, and I'm looking forward to doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Latifah Simon.
Thank you all so much. I'm so excited to be in this forum tonight. It feels amazing. We've been working so hard on my campaign, and as some folks know, but not all, in this race, I have the broadest based coalition throughout the 7 cities, from endorsements to from elected officials to the endorsement of most of our labor community, from the nurses to the teachers to fire. I'm so excited to be supported by the workers in this district, and really by folks on the ground, by mothers and by single parents and by workers and by folks who are working so hard in small businesses. And beyond that, my decades-long record of building and leading institutions, leaving every single institution that I've led and started better off than before I left it, having coalition throughout this country, in Congress and on the streets. I believe that not only are we going to win this race, but we are going to do amazing things in Congress. I have an amazing mentor group, and we're going to win, and we would love your support.
Thank you. Next up, Dr. Jennifer Tran.
Thank you. Thank you again for this opportunity tonight. And as my colleague Tim Sanchez says, this was really fun. And I'll leave you with a few remarks. Playgrounds full of laughter, thriving business districts, empowered individuals finding homes, stronger safety and security, a future free from borders and insurmountable debt. This is the American dream that my parents carried in their hearts when they sought refuge from the war-torn country. And while our leaders may engage in blame games and discord, our communities are ready for a positive transformation. And embracing progressive values while confronting our challenges head on will lift our neighborhoods. Our resilience is remarkable in the East Bay, but it's time for a new American dream. And our communities have defied the odds to provide for their families, but they shouldn't have to shoulder the burden alone. The East Bay's diversity calls for fresh and effective leadership that prioritizes fairness, collaboration, equity, and accountability. I am that candidate. And though we may feel discouraged, we possess tremendous power to affect change. So on March 5th, please vote for Dr. Tran for Congress, and together we can create a brighter future. Thank you very much.
Great. Tony Daysog.
Great. Well, thank you very much for this evening. It was a pleasure presenting my views. I want to quickly begin by making a slight correction. Earlier this evening, I mentioned that I would increase the highest marginal tax rate from 37% to 50%. The 50% marginal tax rate will only apply to those households making more than $570,000. So I just want to make sure to make that correction. Now, I want to close by saying I've served on our city council here in Alameda for 19 years. I am in my third time as the vice mayor of this city of Alameda. I understand Alameda and the broader district. I might have grown up in Alameda, but I came of age in Berkeley as a Cal student, undergrad and grad student, and in my youth serving on the youth orchestra there. In Congress, like I did in city council, I will ask the hard questions, even of Democrats. I will ask questions like, why are we sending depleted uranium-tipped shell casings to the Ukraine? And I say that because I'm the son of a mother who survived the Nagasaki atomic bomb. Thank you.
Thanks. And last but certainly not least, Denard Ingram.
Thank you so much again, Meredith and Zach, for hosting this, and to the Alameda Dem Club for allowing myself and my colleagues to share our platforms. It's important that voters know exactly where your candidates stand on these issues, and forums like these are important just as much as being able to talk to your candidates out in the streets, seeing them out, being able to ask them questions directly. Those things are equally as important. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm a social worker. I'm not a career politician. I'm someone who has for a very long time, like many of the people in your club, I would assume, have seen the failures of our current government and the things that are not working. And I'm taking my experience and the energy that I'm doing now in my community and bringing that to Congress to be an effective agent of change for all of us. Nothing about us without us, and help me reimagine our democracy with your support. I look forward to earning your endorsement, and thank you again for having us here tonight.
Great, thank you. And it looks like our clock
Yep, it did.
expired.
We get 90 minutes with that timer app, and then it expires. So
Yeah.
that was perfect timing.
So we realize we're at time, but we wondered if you guys would entertain us just for a couple more minutes as we do a quick lightning round.
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Zach.
Thank you, Meredith. So most of these are yes or no questions. Very quickly, we'll run through each candidate. So the first question that we have in our lightning round is, if Barbara Lee doesn't win the U.S. Senate primary and decides to run again for her Congress seat, will you withdraw your run? Yes or no? So first up is Denard Ingram, and then Tim Sanchez.
My answer is no.
Tim Sanchez?
Yes, I will withdraw. I respect Barbara Lee that much.
Latifah Simon, and then Dr. Jennifer Chan.
We're nowhere near that space. I am believing that Barbara Lee will be the United States Senator from the great state of California. She is my mentor. And when we get there, based on her, yes, I will follow the lead of the party and our community.
Thank you. Dr. Chan.
That's a lightning question. And I would have to follow my colleague Latifah on that one. We are all stepping out courageously to serve our communities as Representative Lee is doing. And so we are nowhere near that. And I think in the meantime, it's really important to celebrate and support progressive candidates as we see on this campaign right now.
Awesome. All right, next question. Should the U.S. Sorry, Tony. Tony Daysog, finally.
YES.
Thank you. Okay, next question. And I'm going to go in reverse order this time. Should the U.S. continue to funding for the Ukraine? So it'll be Tony and then Dr. Jennifer Chan.
YES.
Dr. Jennifer Chan?
I didn't catch that question. Can you repeat that?
Should the U.S. continue funding for the Ukraine?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Next is Latifah Simon and then Tim Sanchez.
With a watchful eye, yes.
Tim Sanchez?
Yes, yes, yes. We've spent 5% of our DoD budget to decimate the Russian military. It's a worthwhile investment.
Awesome. And then finally, Denard Ingram.
I would echo my colleague Latifah with the watchful eye, but yes, we should.
Perfect. The next one, do you support efforts to recall the Alameda County District Attorney? Yes or no? So we're going to go again, the first order again, starting with Denard Ingram.
I do not support efforts to recall DA Pamela Price.
Tim Sanchez,
I do not.
Latifah Simon,
I do not.
Dr. Jennifer Chan,
I do not.
and Tony Desog.
No opinion yet.
Next question, do you in general support reparations? Yes or no? And we'll start again in reverse order, starting with Tony Desog.
No.
Dr. Jennifer Chan?
Yeah.
Latifah Simon,
Yes.
Tim Sanchez,
Yes.
and Denard Ingram.
Yes.
And then next question, do you in general support sorry, that was the last question. The next question is, are you for congressional term limits? Yes or no? So we'll start with Denard Ingram.
Yes, yes, yes.
Tim Sanchez,
Yes.
Latifah Simon,
Yes, I signed the pledge.
Dr. Jennifer Tran,
Yes.
Tony Desog.
Absolutely not.
There we go. Next question. What's your favorite brunch spot in District 12? And so we'll start with Tony.
Signal Coffee, because I was the largest coffee goer there in last year.
Perfect.
I got a hat for that.
Dr. Jennifer Tran.
Oh, right now I'm thinking about the lavender latte at Julia's, but I'm Vietnamese, so I'll eat pho and soup every morning if I could.
Perfect. Latifah Simon.
Town Fair Chef Michelle at the Oakland Museum.
Perfect. And Tim Sanchez.
Zocalo Coffee in Brooklyn Basin does an amazing breakfast sandwich on croissant that is to die for.
Amazing. And Denard Ingram.
There is a fantastic diner in East Oakland called Sequoia. I highly recommend. They have a fantastic chicken and waffle on Sundays. That would be my choice.
Let's go, Denard.
Let's do it.
Thank you. That concludes the lightning round, all the questions that we had. I want to thank everybody here for showing up and coming to our club and speaking to our community, but also the greater District 12 community, because this will be online so everyone can find these things. But this is such an important part of the democratic process to have people show up, and we can hear from our candidates, we get informed, and then we go out and we vote. And that's one of the things that as a club, we want to focus on, making sure we turn out more Democrats and really focus on making sure that we push democratic values and our planks and our platforms as a party, and as well as making sure that we're properly represented in our U.S. congressional seat. So I want to thank everybody for coming. This was, I think, a great meeting to have everyone here. And now we'll go through our endorsement process. So we have our bylaw rules. For how that work exactly, we have a threshold 55% that we have to hit for any one candidate, and we'll send this out to the people according to the rules as specified in our charter. I won't go through all of them right now, but we'll try to get everyone to submit their vote, and we will close out voting on Sunday. So we should have results posted and emailed out to everybody, and then we'll make those announcements publicly on our website and our Facebook page and our social media platforms. So I want to thank everyone again. Thank you everyone for coming. This was great to have, and we have 2 more of these coming up. So next second Wednesday and the following second Wednesday will be our next 2 meetings. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Zach.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Good luck with the campaigns.
Thank you.
See everyone.